Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're stepping right into the middle of a highly polarized internet firestorm, the really tragic Carmelo Anthony case. We'll be drawing from two distinct sources to unpack not just the terrible realities of a fatal encounter between two teenagers, but the explosive social, legal, and political narratives that completely hijack the internet in the aftermath.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the universally recognized facts of the incident itself, move into the legal verdict, and then examine the harsh survival realities of the Texas prison system. After that, we'll analyze the massive media backlash, and finally, look at the real-world impact of all that viral outrage. Let's jump in.
Part 1. The fatal track meet incident.
So to really understand the outrage that followed, we have to start with the objective facts of what actually happened that rainy afternoon. According to our sources, rain forced high school track teams to huddle under a single tent. 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony took shelter under an opposing team's tent. Minutes later, Austin Metcalf, who was also 17, repeatedly asked Carmelo to leave, over 15 times by some accounts. But Carmelo refused, allegedly stating, "Touch me and see what happens," knowing he had a folding knife right there in his backpack. Seconds later, a verbal clash escalates, Austin pushes him, and in 0 seconds, Carmelo fatally stabs Austin in the chest. A simple dispute over a tent ends a life.
Now listen to what he said right after the incident. When the school resource officer arrived and called him the alleged suspect, Carmelo actually corrected him on the spot. He said, "I'm not alleged. I did it. He put his hands on me and I stabbed him." This is absolutely crucial because it firmly establishes his immediate admission of the act, locking in the core facts before the internet rumor mill even had a chance to start spinning.
Moving on to Part 2. Legal realities and the verdict. With the core event locked in, our sources point out a pretty massive gap between public sympathy and proven reality. The internet wildly speculated that Carmelo defended himself with a harmless cleat sharpener or that he was mercilessly jumped by several large men. But the established court facts? They proved he used a folding knife and was pushed by a single individual only after he actively provoked the confrontation.
And this brings us to a really vital legal concept highlighted by our sources: proportionality of force. You know, a lot of online commentators felt Carmelo was justified simply because someone touched him first. But legally, you cannot use a deadly weapon to retaliate against a bare-handed physical push. Even under Texas's robust stand-your-ground and castle doctrine laws, you absolutely cannot provoke an escalation and then claim self-defense when the other party reacts. Because that defense completely lacked proportionality of force, it took the jury a mere 3 hours to convict Carmelo Anthony. Think about that. 3 hours. Despite massive online campaigns and a huge social media uproar defending him, the jury just shut out the noise. They looked purely at the established facts and the law, resulting in an incredibly swift verdict.
The judge handed down a really severe sentence: 35 years in prison. To put that into perspective, this young man will serve at least 17.5 years. That's a full decade and a half before even being considered for parole. And as our sources point out, his behavior while incarcerated is going to heavily dictate if that early release ever actually happens.
Which leads us to Part 3. Texas prison system survival.
Our sources shift their focus here strictly to the violent realities Carmelo now faces. According to one commentator, there is no traditional, safe, protective custody in Texas. Inmates in danger go to administrative segregation, or ADSEG. This is, effectively, severe long-term solitary confinement. Realistically, nobody can survive a 35-year sentence in complete isolation without severe psychological degradation, meaning Carmelo will inevitably have to navigate the extremely dangerous general population.
So why is he at such a high risk? Well, first off, he comes from a suburban background with zero protective gang affiliations. He's entirely unprotected. But more critically, the heavy, racially charged media focus on this case has brought him massive, unwanted attention. Our sources assert that fierce militant prison gangs, specifically the Aryan Brotherhood Texas, will view him as a high-value trophy. In that environment, attacking a high-profile media figure earns you status. He faces constant, daily threats.
Let's look at Part 4, Race, Media, and Public Backlash.
This brings us to the volatile socio-political commentary exposing a really deep cultural divide. An activist speaking outside the courtroom starkly highlighted the extreme polarization of the case. It demonstrates how advocacy groups frame the swift conviction entirely around racial injustice rather than the legal facts of the stabbing.
For these groups, a 35-year sentence for a black teenager killing a white teenager wasn't about the law. It was seen as indicative of a racially biased judicial system.
The commentators point out that the true narrative was pretty quickly hijacked by political agendas and deliberate misinformation. A GoFundMe raised over $1 million, which, according to our sources, was actually squandered on cars and houses rather than used for his legal defense. We even saw elected officials publicly questioning basic biological facts like whether a knife to the heart is actually a deadly weapon. And rumors circulated of an all-white jury, which court sources confirm was entirely false. The jury was actually highly diverse.
Broadening the scope a bit, our second source explicitly connects this public reaction to what they perceive as systemic media bias. The source argues there is a widespread, disproportionate public outrage that shifts depending entirely on the race of the victim. To illustrate this, the commentator compares the Texas case to a recent incident in the UK involving a victim named Henry Novak, asserting that there is a dangerous media double standard in how victims' lives are valued.
Finally, Part 5, the impact of online commentary.
This brings us to the actual physical reality of all this unprecedented online noise. It doesn't just stay on the internet, you know? The sources passionately argue that activists attempting to defend Carmelo online are actually doing him massive, irreversible physical damage. By turning his trial into a viral political spectacle, they have guaranteed that he enters the Texas prison system as a highly publicized target. The internet outrage designed to help him has paradoxically ensured his time behind bars will be exponentially more dangerous.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves a difficult question. Does viral political outrage distract us from objective legal facts, or does it permanently alter the course of justice? How does the explosive collision of internet rumors, racial politics, and a tragic loss of life ultimately reshape our understanding of these horrific events? Well, the sources make one thing perfectly clear. When tragedy goes viral, the truth is often the very first casualty. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the hard questions.